Good morning. I'm Danina Herrera, and I just want to say thank you all for joining us for this discussion on DISA DevSecOps. It's an honor for NetApp to be supporting partner of AFCIA's TechNet Cyber. Our speakers are going to discuss two tiers of tools and capabilities that DISA offers in both IL5 and IL6. As the intelligent data infrastructure company, NetApp enables warfighters to leverage a DISA APL-approved operating system with built-in DevOps tools that automate provisioning and simplify containerization management. Our speakers are John Machadi, Matthew Palmer, Alexander McFarland, and Kyle Saunders. Mr. Machadi is the security manager for DISA's PEO Spectrum. He's an expert in software factories and DevSecOps pipeline development and has served DISA for more than 14 years. Mr. Palmer is the chief engineer for the C2 portfolio at PEO Services at DISA. He's led organizations to deploy mobility, AI, commercial cloud, and DevSecOps automation capabilities. Mr. McFarland is the technical lead for DISA's J9's Olympus program. He most recently led the technical team for DISA's Vulcan program and previously served as the lead architect for DMA's public web program. Mr. Saunders is the C2 software factory engineer at DISA and has worked at modernizing and the software development lifecycle for DISA for over the last 6 years. Please join me in welcoming these distinguished speakers.
Well, appreciate that opening. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Palmer, and like was just announced, I am the chief engineer of DISA's command and control portfolio, so I will be moderating our panel today on DISA DevSecOps. First, I'm going to give the panelists one more opportunity to introduce themselves or anything that was sort of missing the opener and talk some about kind of what their current projects they're working today. And then I have teed up 3 to 4 questions for each of the panelists that are nice, easy softball questions that make DISA DevSecOps look really good. And then we will make sure that at the end we save time for any other questions. If people want to pitch some hardballs or curveballs, I'll leave that one up to you guys. So first, specifically the kind of what we're going to go in today is what capabilities DISA currently offers related to DevSecOps and sort of what we have coming down the pipeline in the next 12 to 24 months. How DISA is working to shift security left and incorporate previously disparate functions into a holistic DevSecOps approach for our customers across the department. And then how we view DISA as uniquely postured to deliver enterprise DevSecOps in a way that meets the administration's intent of continuous modernization and speed to market of new technologies. So first, just want to give any of the members an additional opportunity to say anything else they work on. Kyle, do you want to add anything from your intro?
Hey, sure. Good morning. My name is Kyle Saunders. I'm the chief engineer for the DISA DevSecOps effort. My time in DISA is relatively short. I've been with DISA for about 5 years, give or take. I've kind of been in the software development lifecycle / agile environment inside DISA the whole time that I've been here. Been working on the software factory effort for a long time. I've been with it through the iterations that we've gone through, so just happy to kind of provide some input there on how we've done. Thanks, Matt.
John?
Sure. I'm John Machadi. I'm with PEO Spectrum. I'm specifically the director at Information Systems Security Manager and Cybersecurity Lead. PEO Spectrum does a lot of software development, so I kind of fell into the role of working with the programs to build their DevSecOps environments, or at least try to get to a DevSecOps environment. I've been with the organization DISA for 16 years and PEO Spectrum for 14 of it.
Thanks, John. Alex?
Again, my name's Alex McFarland. I'm the technical lead on Olympus right now and previously had done the architecture and stuff behind Vulcan. I've been here for about 3 years. I'm a big advocate of the power of culture to change things. I think that culture eats tools for breakfast, which is kind of funny since we're up here pitching a tools program. But it's been really exciting for me to watch the agency shift and start really moving in the right direction and establish positive inertia. It's a big ship and it takes a while to turn, but there is positive momentum in the right direction. I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Thanks, Alex. So I'll start with some of our questions, and I'll actually start with Kyle. So Kyle, can you, being the chief engineer of the DISA DevSecOps capability, can you kind of go into what is DISA's DevSecOps capability, kind of what that entails and how it came about?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so the DISA DevSecOps capability has been around DISA for a little while, kind of started in like the 2020 kind of COVID kind of period, similar to the Platform One. Really, it started out of the command and control portfolio. There was a need to modernize a lot of the C2 software at DISA. And a lot of the C2 stuff is on high side on SIPR, right? And at the time, there was no DoD-wide software factory on the SIPR side. So it's kind of where we wanted to get a software factory put together. We had two main programs, Geeks, GCCSJ, and then JPES were kind of the two high side programs that we wanted to get into the software factory. So a lot of what we did was gather requirements on what they needed and what we needed to provide from an artifact perspective or capability perspective. So got the software factory stood up. We called it C2SF. That was kind of the name that we branded for the last 4 or 5 years. So C2SF, Command and Control Software Factory. We recently undergone a little bit of a name change. We rebranded to Citadel, and that was just us looking to expand past the C2 portfolio, right? Because as the capability was stood up, we started to get other DISA programs that are kind of like, hey, you guys offer this scanning that we need, or you offer source code repositories, or you offer stuff that we need to do development. So in that rebrand, we kind of wanted to back up away from the C2 portfolio and offer the solution to all of DISA. So that was that rebrand. And what Citadel is, right? It's a fully ATO'd IL5 and IL6 software factory. We have about 25 tools that are specifically focused to just provide artifacts for programs to use for ATOs, for continuous monitoring, all that good stuff. And currently, the Citadel Software Factory, we're going under a little bit more of a rebranding. We're moving up to DISA DevSecOps. We recently got the nod to kind of be the agency enterprise software factory. You guys might have heard of Vulkan before. Vulkan is another software factory inside DISA. So currently, right now, both programs are under the same portfolio, and we're currently doing a technical assessment to figure out what a consolidation of that might look like in the future. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. I will say one thing that was interesting about the starting DevSecOps with the C2 approach was that most software factories, or almost all of the other ones I heard in the department, they usually started, in kind of an IL2, IL5 unclassified level, and then, like most enterprise capabilities, you slowly grow it from there. You slowly grow it to the other classification fabrics, how you figure out cross domains, tactical edge, and all that stuff. One interesting thing I think about starting the software factory from that harder use case was by the time we were able to field it for the C2 systems, we had actually already made a software factory that had crossed the bridge for a bunch of our other systems in the department, right? C2 being kind of the hard requirements. Once you can do a software factory, it works for that process. Adding in other fourth estate agencies, other business systems, other systems that didn't have nearly the same rigor of requirements. We had sort of long past that and could onboard them actually day one without any changes or anything else to our factory. To the point now where we have 2 to 3 times as many non-C2 systems onboarded as we do C2 systems, actually. So, cool. Appreciate that. Thanks, Kyle. So, Alex, question for you. Given that you work in DISA's J9 hack portfolio, how do you sort of see the capability offerings that J9 has and typically offers in a very modular way to the command services and DAFAs? How do you see those fitting in to complement a more holistic approach of DISA DevSecOps?
Yeah, when we talk about a holistic approach to DISA DevSecOps, I think about DevSecOps in general. I think about people, processes, and tools across a value stream, right? So a value stream from where you have your idea to when you have it running in production, but not stopping when it's running in production. Also taking that feedback, taking customer feedback, technical feedback, learning lessons, bringing that in that sort of that virtuous cycle of improvement that keeps going. But if you listen to that, there's a lot of people and processes a part of that, and we can't give you the processes. And your people and procurement, all the rest. This is all part of this, right? So you're gonna have a part to play in it, but we can provide tooling that helps. And the good thing is that tooling influences culture and it influences processes, and it can provide a nudge in the right direction. So adopting this stuff can be pretty transformative. Speaking more specifically about the J9 portfolio and how it applies, when when I arrived, you could see that J9 had been positioning its offerings, trying to work towards a more holistic front-to-back thing. And you could see, and this is true of J9 specifically and DISA at large, you could see that there was offerings out there, but they weren't really stitched together. And I would argue that we could still do better stitching everything together across the board. So take a step back and kind of look at that from a cloud-specific perspective, right? So we had JWCC, so you could buy cloud easier. You could make the procurement easier. Well, now what? How do you get a secure cloud operating environment off the ground? How do you configure it correctly? So with that need out there, the DoD IAC program was created, which gives you a secure baseline to be able to get a pre-stigged environment with a tremendous amount of documentation towards your ATO ready to go off the ground. But the thing with DoD IAC, it's great for a quick stand-up, I need something fast, and it helps you get an operational environment, but it does not operationalize infrastructure as code, right? There's a gap there. So we looked at that and said, how can we operationalize and kind of stitch some of these environments together? And that's why we stood up Vulcan, because we were hearing similar things from our customers that they want like a best value bang for the buck type platform to be able to do that. Well, when we brief Vulcan, we hear a lot, well, how does Vulcan run my workload? And the answer was, well, Vulcan doesn't run your workload. And we heard that feedback loud and clear, which is why we've started Olympus, which is our managed cloud offering. So Olympus has it will be across several CSPs. Right now it's Azure and AWS to start. And it has kind of two flavors, right? So one is networking with common services. With this model, you can bring your own environment built as you want, but you're responsible for your own IATT, your own accreditation, but you can consume networking from us, and you can consume some common services, NTP, some monitoring bits, SMTP, that type of thing, just as an accelerator. Then the other side of that is the DISA managed environment, which ends up being sort of like an operationalized DoD IC in a way. So in this model, still you're getting peered up with whatever the CSP's native network peering technology is, but we've pre-deployed the networking for you. We've whitelisted a set of managed services that are designed to deploy into that networking. You consume the common service, and we'll keep updating those policies and guardrails and controls underneath of it ongoing as an offering. Now, what's kind of fun though is as you learn these lessons in the cloud, you learn that things like DevSecOps, small batch size, all these lessons we learn from Lean and Agile are really, really important, and the cloud rewards those, and it punishes if you do waterfall stuff and you do ClickOps along the way. I mean, you can make it work, right? Your environment will go, but there's a good chance it's going to cost more and maybe be worse than what your on-prem solution was doing it the same way. But these lessons that you learn from doing cloud stuff and that we've learned from doing cloud stuff can be applied to on-prem. So we have a lot of awesome solutions on-prem as well. Stratus is a VMware environment right now, but it has full API support, so you can certainly do DevSecOps stuff against that. There's CAS, the Containers as a Service offering, which is a managed Kubernetes offering, and that they have pipelines that feed things that are doing CI/CD and GitOps with Argo CD into that environment. Very modern approaches, and they're doing entire reimagining of the data center. And that's not to even mention like stuff we're doing at the Tactical Edge with Joe and that sort of thing. So it's pretty exciting time, but none of that works without a DevSecOps solution to stitch together to be the glue, and that's where DISA DevSecOps comes into play, because all those things in isolation, it's difficult for customers to adopt. They don't really know where to go. They don't know how to set it up. So I think with not just the CI/CD pipeline stuff, we tend to focus on the DevSecOps because DevSecOps has become synonymous with pipelines, but really it's more than that. It's all the collaboration process, which also where the Jira and Confluence and all the planning tools come into play as well.
Thanks, Alex. So, John, over to you. As one of the DISA directorate's ISMs here, you've reviewed programs that have gone through a few DevSecOps or software factory solutions at DISA, the MilDeps, and in the IC. What challenges have you seen in terms of having a successful CI/CD pipeline in those environments?
Thanks, Matt. Now, just to confirm, Steve Wallace said not to sugarcoat things, right?
You did, so you can blame him.
All right. So there's a few things. RMF. Everyone knows that RMF can be a blocker. The way DISA implements it certainly slows down the processes, particularly when it comes to DevSecOps, because you have to do the change requests, you have to do all this paperwork and all this. There's lack of processes. We don't have any standardized processes. We don't know what RME wants to use for tools. We don't know how they want to be configured. We have lack of staffing. We have these two tiers of DevSec environments. But we don't have any staff to run them, so PMs have to go out and buy staff to run them, along with getting the CISP, the SCCA, the operational environment, and that's the problem. That's integrated services, lack of integrated services. DISA has all the tools. They have all the capabilities. It's different parts of the organization, and everyone has to do a lot of work to make it work. Specifically, I want to talk about RMF. There's no DoD standard of what triggers a change request, so it's up to the AO. And I have a tool, I have an application in an environment that is a true CI/CD pipeline. The developer does their development, they do a merge, it goes through, it passes all the security controls, passes all the vulnerability scans, goes through SD elements, SonarQube, 80% coverage, that kind of thing, and then it gets deployed. They can deploy something in a few days. Then we have another pipeline that it takes weeks because we get the code in, they put it through the pipeline, it goes through a change request, and we have to wait 12 to 22 days to get that change request, then we can deploy it. That's a problem. That's not a CI/CD pipeline. So it needs to be fixed. And I don't know how to do it, but we just recognize that as a problem. The lack of processes and people is a big issue because when you run code through a scanner, there's going to be a lot of false positives. Somebody has to manage all that. I have an application with 1,400 false positives. I have one guy that can review them all. That takes a long time, which means we end up deploying code that we haven't been able to validate all the false positives for. That's a real security problem. Army's aware. We're honest about it. We're all up front, but it's clearly something that needs to be solved. And I think DISA can do it. I'm sure DISA can do it. I've been here 14 years. This organization can do anything it wants, but we just have to change our culture, get everyone together in the room, and really get on the same page on how we're going to do this and start merging all these different issues.
Thanks, John. I will say, there was a DevSecOps panel earlier this week that was on from DoD CIO. It was called the State of DevSecOps, and it had an outside consultant from Carnegie Mellon do a big evaluation of some of these problems like you're talking about that are not unique to DISA by any means when it comes to DevSecOps. And interestingly, the number one thing the study found was that none of the problems were technical problems, right? Like, we can contract for all the tools that are needed to do DevSecOps maturely. We have access to the contractors who can implement all that stuff. It was really a culture thing. And in the culture specifically, which was interesting because we've been saying implementing this as a culture is we've been saying that for 15, however long DevSecOps has been around. But specifically, the interesting thing was they nailed down what the culture problem was. And it was, we currently work in general in a department where there's a culture of hierarchical control. That if you're an AO for something, or you're a decision authority or branch chief, you feel like it is your job to be the filter for every release, every software program under you goes through. You have to understand it. You have to stamp it approved. You have to say the go, no go. And really that just slows down the department to move at the speed at which an individual can understand all of the changes going on in their organization technically, which often is not very fast. So the interesting thing that they said was, we need to move to a culture of hierarchical control of approved processes, and collaborative processes. And that's basically saying, I don't need to approve every release. I need to approve the way in which you're doing releases. I need to be, bought into how you're getting, your stuff through a software factory, how you're going through the ATO process, how you are dealing with false positives, things like John said. I don't need to be the person that has to bless it every single time, right? Like, I want to be able to give one field trip signature, and that tells you to be able to go and do whatever you need to do, as opposed to individually signing every slip of every single action you take. So I think that's a big one. That's one I know we've been working with the DISA Army to start moving towards accrediting processes more than accrediting programs or individual pieces of software. And then just periodically auditing those processes to ensure that we're actually doing the things we say, which with a lot of this stuff that's big on the artifacts the software factories produce, being able to have SBOMs for all these compilations and actually show that what was actually done is a big way that these software factories can actually hold PMOs in the long run more accountable for security and not actually less.
Actually, Matt, can I go off script a little bit and pile on?
Yeah, of course.
So one thing that was interesting, though, you're talking about the 1,400 false positives and all the work and the burden, but that also takes 1,400 potential things that would have been hidden before without the code scanning, right? And it surfaces that and brings it forward. So I've often joked throughout my career that if it was easy, X and X competitor would be doing it instead of us. Look, and there's for sure like a lot of work to do as you front load this, particularly if you're adopting an application that wasn't built with this process along the way. Now you've got the technical debt of catching it up, right? If you're standing up something new and you're doing this the whole time, you're knocking those down as it goes, as the program's developed. But if you're taking a legacy application, and we have 2 or 3 of those in DoD, right? Then it's a lot of work to catch up. But still, like your skeletons in the closet are being held visible, and it's a lot better if we're finding those potential vulnerabilities than if China is the one taking the first crack. Even if, as the I said, you look at it and you go, my gosh, what am I going to do now, right? So,
to be honest, they also talked about in the State of DevSecOps report that no current DevSecOps environments in the department have a reciprocity with any of the other. There's 75 software factories, even within the MilDeps. Each individual software factories don't have a reciprocity, even within the same organization. I think a lot of that comes down to that sounds very ridiculous, right? And like that's just a policy problem we should solve very easily. But part of the problem is just what John and Alex have been talking about. The AOs are under pressure to push the software even with the vulnerabilities. So a lot of software does get released through software factories that did not essentially necessarily even pass its own safety guardrails because it's mission critical and time sensitive. It has to go out and the security can catch up. So just because something went through a software factory, it might have 1,400 false positives or 1,400 POAMs, but only the AO who accredited that knows that, and they're managing that. So it's not always easy for another AO in a different department to say, hey, well, I'll just take this thing because you pushed it through DevSecOps. And they say, no, I don't know what you mitigated, POAM'd, what risk you're willing to accept. I know what I'm using the product for. I need to put it back through my software factory. And so a lot of these software factories actually line up linearly and almost created a waterfall process of DevSecOps in some ways, which is a little ridiculous kind of thinking about it, but it's just the reality. And so a big thing that we're trying to work and had a long talk actually trying to start with the Navy's process is basically Navy has a good overarching accreditation process for all their software factories called Navy RAISE, where it's almost like they own the process of DevSecOps at the highest level for the Navy, and they actually do certifications of all of the different software factories in the Navy to say it meets these expectations, and you produce a consistent object out of your DevSecOps that is essentially the record of what you did. So even if, so that you can produce that and hand to another Navy software factory under this process, and they can immediately ingest it and know what you POAM'd, what risks you accepted, all those things. So they know what they're getting into with that, and they can very easily inherit your scorecard of that and then use it in the next software factory, either add that additional security if they need it and have, the luxury of time, or not. But it's basically a consistent artifact, almost like, I came from the healthcare IT world. The electronic health record is a consistent artifact. You could pass through all these different systems so that people know everything they need to know about this person. That's kind of what we want to be able to get to in terms of the output of these software factories and the tabulation of all the different tools, all the different findings, all the different POAMs and mitigations to all of these other software factories where you might have to pass code to. That way they're not stacking them up linearly. We're actually inserting into their process at a given point. And one thing we're interested in doing this DISA C2 software factory is, especially because Navy's our biggest customer of DISA Enterprise C2 solutions, was actually maybe even get under their RAISE accreditation as the first non-Navy one to get essentially that certification from the Navy to have those standardized artifacts passed amongst our software factories. And then if how well that works, that could be something that maybe goes into as like more of a joint standard for all the software factories that could get on board, so that regardless of which brand or flavor you're under, you'd actually know sort of interoperably where you fit into the other software factory processes. Okay, so Kyle, number 2 question. So we talked a little bit about legacy programs, but so a lot of our customers, especially at DISA, manage legacy systems that have decades of tech debt, are written in outdated program languages, and don't have the financial capabilities to a full-scale modernization. Do they still could be a potential customer of DISA DevSecOps, or are there other worthwhile solutions that we can offer them?
Yeah, great question. So this similar to what the whole Navy RAISE 2.0 that we were just talking to a second ago, right? What really matters in DevSecOps is the artifacts that we're producing for programs. So So yes, the DISA DevSecOps Software Factory, right? It's very modular, so you can kind of pick and choose what you need. Like I mentioned, we have about 25 tools, and what that looks like a lot of the times is programs will come to us with their IATT or ATO documentation or their FIPS 199 categorization and say, hey, this is what our program looks like. This is our CIA triangle or high, medium, low, low, whatever. We need these artifacts from your software factory. Can you please help us pick and choose what are the tools we need for that? So software factory is super modular. What kind of the interface looks like, I mean, it's very understood now, but code gets committed to a software factory. A pipeline gets written to kind of choose what scans need to be conducted or what the software needs to, needs to happen with the software. So code committed, a pipeline runs, that generates artifacts for people like John and the ISMs, ISOs, the SCARs, and JITIC, some of the testers, to be able to go into the tools and see kind of the artifacts. So very modular. You kind of pick and choose what you need based on your mission.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
Over to Alex. Alex, how do you see DISA benefiting from partnerships with private industry DevSecOps tool companies to improve the future of code automation or facilitated delivery of product?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at all the stuff that we do, I mean, really everything that we do is driven out of industry. Our problem set is special, right? But the tools that we use, at least in this part of the space, to do it aren't necessarily that exotic. So the purposes to which we put our processes and our automation and our tools and our code and all the rest are pretty different. But the act of building secure code, writing good automation, and running good infrastructure is not. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from industry. 10 or 15 years ago, I attended a talk about digital transformation by the guy at Microsoft named Jeff Snover, who created PowerShell originally, and he was talking about things that it makes sense to outsource and things that it doesn't make sense to outsource. So if a thing is your special sauce, if it's the unique capability that makes your organization or your group special, you don't give that away, right? But if there's things that another group can do better that isn't the thing that makes you special, then that makes sense, right? So you don't usually hear that Honda beat Toyota last quarter because their email was better. That's not really a thing. And so, we've adopted a great number of industry tools, and there's things that we just simply couldn't do on our own. You look at all these code scanners with the patterns and the vulnerabilities, or software bill of materials and the database that has to pull from and know what's where, with all the real-time intelligence that's pulled in from across the industry. AI stuff, large language models, these are things that would be difficult or impossible for us to build in-house. So leaning on our industry partners is critical, and not just on the technology, right? Just the lessons and the patterns of how we move work through the system and how we learn, and IT organization, but even a look at like Toyota's transformation, in the 80s and 90s, where they started to smack American car companies around because they adopted lean and a culture of learning. Specific to code automation and stuff, we talked a lot about how we have all of the tools in house, and so we haven't brought them to bear. So I'm excited to just kind of see that come together. But as far as like new things, I think AI is going to be really interesting. I have a running gag that I make that right now I feel like the AI coding assistants are like having a really, really senior dev pair program with you who's about 6 beers into a really good night, And now I'm also teased because they've had more beer every time I tell that story. But you've seen that improve over time, and they get better and better, even week to week almost now. Like it's amazing how fast that's accelerating. And I am really excited to see where that goes in a year, not just in terms of like code completion, working in your IDE, or getting it to write code for you, but for things in the CI/CD pipeline, right? John has his 1,400 false positives problem. Maybe this is something where AI can eventually go through and take like a more of a heuristic dynamic approach to it and look at the code and not just that one function in isolation. Well, you're not sanitizing your inputs here, but the calling function sanitizes the input. So maybe it's not such a big deal. And AI would be able to see that stuff where our typical code scanners can't always. So I'm excited to see where that goes as far as, easing the burden and getting folks going a little quicker.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Thanks, Alex. John, over to you. So in your PEO Spectrum programs, what are the biggest holdups to getting a program authorized and fielded today, and where can or should DevSecOps mitigate those holdups?
So I'm going to go back to DISA offerings and the lack of integration. A DevSecOps pipeline is a fully integrated system from the get to the operational cloud. It's a CI/CD pipeline. as it stands right now, if a PMO wants to build a CI/CD pipeline for a new capability to deliver to the warfighter, they have to go to Vulcan or Citadel, and then they have to go to JWCC and work out a contract to get an operational environment, or go to Olympus. Olympus is operational. They have to go get CISSP services. They have to go get SCCA services. They have to go and purchase RME services. And they have to do this for every single new program. They also have to hire people, because you need people to run these CI/CD pipelines. So they have to get a contract for that. And that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. If every PM is having to do that for every program, and every PEO and DISA, that's a lot of money. And it's slow. I mean, getting an ATO right now already takes a year. If it takes you 6 months just to get your contracting in place so you can run this pipeline, build this pipeline and get it operational, you can't even start the RMF process until you have most of that, because that's where you're going to get a lot of your documentation. So now it's a year and a half. You've been obligated to build this system in 2 years, and you've just wasted 18 months to get your environments and your development just to get to that initial deployment so that it can be tested. DevSecOps, if it was operational, would speed up those processes, because especially if it was all one service. You go to a service, you say, this is what we're going to do. They build it for you. They provide the staff. They get everything configured. They're standardized, DISA standardized checks in all the Fortify, SonarCube, SD Elements, whatever the tool is. Those thresholds are already built in by DISA, so the developer and the PM don't have to figure that stuff out. So that's another educational issue that exists. By providing a fully DevSecOps pipeline would significantly reduce that first 6 months. The second year, the year that it takes to get an ATO, may not help so much with that, the way we've implemented RMF, but when they're building this pipeline, they can be working with RME to get their processes approved as it's being built, so that when it does come time to start spitting stuff out, the process goes like this. And they can start doing small changes, weekly changes, and nobody has to look at it because it goes through all the checks. And I was going to mention AI as well, because eventually AI could come into this and do a lot more and a lot faster than SCARs can do in reviewing this information. And that's when we could have real continuous ATOs. Because I know everyone wants to hear about continuous ATOs. And that's the only way we're going to get there. We got to synchronize our services, bring them all together, get people trained, and redevelop and develop new processes so that RME can get what they need so they can make decisions quickly.
Thanks, appreciate that, John. And I know, Ms. Arrington's big on using, AI in the back end of RME to sort of help determine the actual risk posture. But, in talking with some of the DoD CIO folks, are kind of being tasked to figure out how that makes that happen. Like, we all agree that the success of that's going to be based on how good data and how much data you can provide to the LLMs, right? They're not just going to magically come out of the box and know how to, process an RMF package, right? They need things like the software factories that we have, which are producing and have dozens of applications going through producing hundreds of code scans and history of those being which got POAN, which got mitigated, and how and when and all that. Like, that's the data sets that that whatever that future RMF AI solution is going to need to feed off of and take into account and regularly train on. So I think these software factories and these tool scans and things that we're building are going to be like absolutely critical to that, and that's probably a direction we're going to end up going down, is how do we link these to whatever sort of central DoD LLM is going to manage this risk holistically for the department through AI. So. All right, Kyle, question over to you. So I think intuitively we know that it's important for a software factory to be able to quickly add or remove tools from its capability offering to sort of keep up with industry. But then also it's difficult with the government, where we have to put what tools we need in contracts and bid them in a very structured manner. So do you, by any chance, have some examples where industry trends kind of pivoted quickly but then we were able to sort of successfully keep up with that adaptation.
Yep. So what we try to do with Citadel or with the software factory, right, is we try to really swim lane a lot of our tools into capabilities. So that allows us to really focus not on the tool, but on the capability that we're providing. And folks like John, right, what are the artifacts that they need from us, or they need that our software to deliver, right, for them. So the most recent one for us was we pivoted a little bit away from Jenkins and moved to GitLab. Previous kind of SDLC model that's been happening inside of Citadel, right, was using Jenkins as kind of our code orchestration platform. That was pushing a compiled container into Nexus, and we deploy from Nexus. GitLab came through with GitLab runners. We've been really liking GitLab runners, been using those recently, and there's some more requirements that we think are coming in the future, like deploying to a DDIL type environment or like a Jono type environment, that we think GitLab runners are going to be able to help us out, right? Because you can kind of wrap everything inside of a runner, from the IAC to actually deploy the infrastructure, and then the runner to actually deploy the compiled code. So we've shifted away from Jenkins. We still offer it in the software factory for some of our legacy programs, right, who have existing or previously built Jenkins pipeline files. But today, right, we've moved a lot to GitLab and GitLab runners to kind of support that. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Kyle. So Alex, over to you. Given that DISA owns the EMAS portfolio, Thunderdome Zero Trust portfolio, and is also one of the few CSSPs and sort of endpoint defender solutions out there for the department in cloud on multiple classification fabrics, how do you see those other PEOs and PMOs that produce products having a synergy with DISA DevSecOps solutions, so the customers can kind of just focus, like John said, on the warfighting capabilities they want to build and not have to worry about how their EMAS package is built or submitted, and having to have a whole team of integrators to sort of compile it all together?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about how the capability is in place, but there's still a lot of pain working across silos. And right now, when you come to DISA, if you want front to back, you end up making 5 or 6 deals, and it can be difficult. You have to negotiate all those separately. You have different lines of support for those. The tools aren't necessarily all integrated. But in that, I mentioned in the introductions how I can feel a sea changing, and examples of that are Olympus was built in collaboration with Thunderdome, which is looking to bring some zero trust capabilities. As we push towards more of a true zero trust offering. And what's interesting about zero trust, it's kind of that story in like itself, right? Zero trust isn't really one thing; it's a whole bunch of technologies that have to come together to realize this vision. So moving away from a network centric to more data centric type control for your environment. And we're nudging in that direction, but I see there's, particularly with the consolidation of the 2 software factories, with Olympus coming online, with the ability of that to deploy to all the data center offerings, there will be opportunities for us to do consolidated offerings or streamline the process of being able to onboard to all those with quick starts and all the rest. I think we can really make a big difference because we have a tremendous amount of power and capability that we've made too difficult to bring to bear, and I think if we can solve that problem, it could be transformative for the DoD in general.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. John, over to you. So based on your reading of DoD CIO's continuous ATO documentation and policy documents, in your discussions you've had with various other AOs and other SMEs on the topic, where do you think DoD is hitting the mark with maturity of tools and processes to meet a continuous ATO, and where do you think we still need more investment?
So I can't really speak for all of DoD, but I can speak from my perspective at DISA, and DISA is not ready to start trying to get CATOs. And I want to talk about the CATO a little bit. A lot of PMs think that having a CATO will make their deployments faster, and while it will reduce the number of change requests, it doesn't get rid of change requests. You're still going to have a change request with significant changes. So it's not a panacea. You're not going to be able to just press a button and have it go through every time for 8 years. It's going to have to be continually monitored. It's going to have to be continually checked. And periodically, you're going to make an infrastructure change, and the risk management executive is going to be like, I want to see this. I want to see your network diagrams. I want to see your documentation. It's how it is. So you're never going to get away from that as long as risk management framework is structured the way it is. There is one DevSecOps provider that I know that used to have a CATO but it went to an ATOC after the CIO put out its guidance. But that's all that changed. That's all that changed. The name of their ATO changed. How they did business, how they managed RMF, how they did development and deployment, none of that changed. So from a CATO to an ATOC, this program in this environment was able to do their commit, and it goes through and it gets deployed within days. And it just kept doing that. It didn't need a CATO to do that. It was the processes, it was the pipeline, it was the integration of everything that made it work. It wasn't what kind of ATO it had. And I think that's really important because I keep hearing people saying the CATO is a solution. In fact, I was told someone said yesterday that that's the solution to some problem that was presented. And it's really not. It will speed up your processes it will speed up your deployments as long as your processes are approved, your people are approved, and your tools are configured appropriately, and your risk management executive has blessed the whole process. For maturity, we need to integrate the tools in the factories with tools used by the AO. We already have Docs. Docs is a container scanner that scans a container as it's built. It creates an asset that gets imported into EMAS. So that automation is really helpful. I was working with them on the pilot. That makes it easier for us when we're doing our reviews, and it helps it easier for the ISSOs because now their assets, if it's a fully cloud-native environment, their assets are being put into EMAS as they're being created. Their STIGs, all their results, it's actually really impressive. We need that for all the tools because right now, or the ISSO is taking these code reviews, or I'm writing a risk assessment with these code reviews, and then I'm manually importing that into EMAS or adding it to a CR document so that the AO and the SCARs can read it. They should be able to just go into EMAS at any time and see what your current state is. That's what continuous monitoring is. And that's what CMRS was supposed to be, right? But we know it's not. And again, we need to invest in machine learning and IA, because I really think that will become critical in authorization management. Instead of reviewers having to look at several reports from various tools, an AI can aggregate all the data provided by the security tools in a factory and provide detailed reports to include the actual risk based on operations and real-world threats. And that would be amazing, and that would speed up everything. That's all we would have are CI/CD pipelines. We wouldn't have hundreds of people having to look at hundreds of ATO packages, and we can put them to work in other areas. We can they can be code reviewers, they can be whatever. So that's where we need to put the money.
Awesome, thanks, John. Yeah, one interesting thing you said, I'm very interested in AI that I think is two business areas people have not really linked together or think necessarily go together, which is the AI related to the DevSecOps factory and the RMF of the products going through it, with the AI that would be monitoring the actual operational networks. Because ideally, if your AI is saying, hey, you have a ton of risk in this particular part of the network, and if you were able to correlate that with which actual DevSecOps pipelines and which products were going to that network, you should be able to sort of know that, hey, I can't accept the same amount of risk to those products because that's an actual place that is actually we visualize to be under, quote unquote, under attack.
Absolutely.
And there's no reason why we can't, bring in the right large language models that can be, know where the DODN in our operational environments are high risk, and then factor that risk back into the acceptance of RMF and the accreditation to actually put that in there. I think too many times we try to provide checklist-based risk assessments, like you did A through Z, but it was all based on a classification, like IL5, IL6, SIPR, TS, SNPR, whatever. But the whole SIPR net is not equally under threat in every single part of the SIPR net. Some have tons of interfaces, are used by foreign mission partners, and are in parts of the world where in a real wartime environment they would be top 5 targets. And then we have other IL6 SIPR systems, which run in a back office and process a bunch of data that only 5 people in the department ever have access to and look at an analytics platform, right? They might both be at the same security classification level, but they're not even remotely close to the same actual risk posture in a true competitive environment. So I think that's one where, personally, I'm excited for how, again, DISA owning the whole cybersecurity and cyber cop of the networks, or DISA plus DODIN, or JFQH DODIN, we should be able to really take advantage of that data with the enterprise software factories in terms of that kind of whole of network and whole of app tech stack security modularity. So we have actually talked for I think the amount of time I want us to, so I'm going to skip our last questions and give the audience the opportunity to ask anything they want on this. So.
Hey, thanks for sharing current state of what you guys are doing there at DISA. I represent Fortify Software, so one of the scanners that y'all use. We're in use across the DoD in many different types of programs. The recent AS&D STIG was updated in April, and it added something for COTS. And now we're starting to hear from some of the DoD organizations that they need to apply the AS&D STIG to commercial software going in as one of the tools within the pipelines. Do you have any comment on, do you plan on starting to AS&D STIG every single tool that you're putting in the pipeline?
Yeah, so Matt, I can kind of take that. So I haven't heard of this. I'm happy to connect after this. One thing that the Citadel Software Factory is doing to address stigging is we are mostly focusing from a containers perspective. John mentioned Docs. It's a GOTS tool that we developed. It's called DevSecOps Operational Container Scanning. Very original name. It was Matt that named it, actually, not me. So what that tool does is it focuses on DISA produces STIG files. They also produce OpenSCAP files, which is equivalent to a DISA STIG, but for containers. So that tool, what we're pushing to do is kind of provide an enterprise container scanning solution to DISA for stigging containers. So that's our answer for containerized STIGs. But I'm happy to connect after this. I also have a few questions for you on like sort of the multi-tenanted Fortify scanning aspect. We're working through some stuff, so we'll connect. Thanks for the question.
Gina Messersmith, Carnegie Government Services. This is actually a question for each one of you. Looking at it through the lens of your specific areas of expertise, what would you say is your main problem statement?
I can take this one as well. Well, I can start.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So the biggest problem similar to what John was saying, right? We have a software factory up. It's a very mature software factory, tons of tools, and everything's working. It's integrated, no issues there. The big problem that we have is programs come to us and are looking for a lot of help in terms of the business process, and so a lot of what we need help with is modernizing government business processes. So that's a big one. A lot of my time is shifted away from actually architecting a software factory and working with individual programs and kind of being like their DevSecOps consultant and advising them on what that process looks like.
So, John, do you want to give it?
Yeah, I was trying to think of how to phrase it. Really, it's how we've implemented RMF. I don't know if this is across the DoD, but the way we've implemented RMF at DISA is one of the biggest delays, is our biggest delay in all of our environments right now. I mean, that's what so that's it.
Good. I think we've heard that's blowing up, right?
Well,
we'll talk about that too for DoD CIO and
we'll
Swift
see.
and all that.
So for me, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? I think underpinning a lot of it is just the length of time that accreditations and stuff create, and that puts artificial pressure sometimes on the engineering things to wrap early, or sometimes you'll be right. You'll have one group that splits off and is like pencil whipping STIG documentation while the other group is actually building it, and then you're trying to marry them up at the end. There's a lot of anti-patterns, and I think all the RMF and the accreditation process, it serves a really critical role. But because it's so heavy, people end up not leveraging it for the good it can do, and it gets treated as a burden and something gets shoved aside. And that time pressure creates other interesting situations, right? So we do a lot of new capability stuff, and so I'm typically not working with the same team from project to project. And I've been blessed to be able to work with really sharp people who pick things up very quickly. But even in that situation, they don't have exposure to all of this tooling. We heard that early, that he was talking about having a staff and build the teams. So you're under pressure to deliver something with this shorter timeline now, with teams who are also training up on it as it's going. And that makes things like doing like an industry style 6 months to MVP much more difficult than it would be if you didn't have to do like the people process, team building, normalizing stuff, while also either really doing the accreditation process or playing lip service to the accreditation process, depending on how it's being handled. So for me, it's two things that kind of come together to make one problem, I think.
And I'll just get one quick thing from my side. They talked about all the technical logistics stuff. When I stood up the software factory, actually my biggest problem was DoD financially. DoD, I cannot stand the way the department does finances. I don't know that anyone likes it or thinks it's how we should work. But when we wanted to stand up this software factory, there was no money for it, despite the fact that everyone knew we needed it, recognized it was super important. It was like, well, no one has designated DISA, a guidance to stand up a program element line and build a enterprise software factory, right? They did it for Thunderdome and Zero Trust. They do it for Doden. They do it for all these other functions. So even though we need DevSecOps, there's no higher power which creates programs that can actually do that. So for a long time, we actually didn't have a program element line. We couldn't form a PMO. We couldn't get staffing because the financial implementation wasn't there from the top down to create a program the way DoD typically creates programs. So it had to be a grassroots effort. And then two, the department doesn't have a concept of venture capital like private industry does. Normally, like if we have a good idea like DevSecOps, we're like, hey, this is going to save the department tons of money in automation in the long run. If you just invest $5 million now, you'll get all this return on investment down the road. The department has no way to do that. The department has no way to give you money at this quote unquote startup phase because we know we're going to save money in the long run, or it's a good idea to build something. You basically have to rob little bits of taxes off operational programs who never budgeted for this, coalesce enough money to grow it from the grassroots up, and then almost kind of like Shark Tank sell it as a program so that someone can give you the sponsorship and the money and sort of build it and they will come. And if I had the ability to pitch this almost like venture capital idea of people who held money specifically for things that would save the department money in the long run, I could do that, make the business case for it, and then people could invest in it, and then it could go through the wickets of the normal operational program. But right now, all of it's been just grassroots up.
Hi, Kimberly Underwood from FCA's Signal Magazine. Matt, you and Kyle mentioned the RAISE 2.0 environment from the Navy. What would it take for DISA to get under their certification, either in terms of processes or culture? And your thoughts of the possibility of a joint standard of that. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is, in the C2 portfolio, we run the Geeks J program, which is one of our, the biggest command and control software programs out there in the department. Navy extends that into Geeks Maritime, and it runs on ships. They extend, so we have a lot of shared products with the Navy. They also do their IC element does a IC level accreditation of our Geeks product and proliferates that as a service. So I think by already having a business case for the Navy to say, hey, if you do like a RAISE 2.0 accreditation or something like that of our software factory, rather than you getting these containerized Geeks builds and then having to re-put it through your process to containerize it, say, to put on a ship or something Navy-centric, I don't have to line my software factory up like I talked about linearly before yours. You can insert with a common artifact at the point where now you're doing the full joint baseline reciprocity, and you're just having to do the last little bit that's Navy-centric to make it operational and functional to put on a ship. So I think having a first use case I think is a big one to show hey, we already do business with the Navy in this. We're literally putting these two very similar software factories and things linearly against each other when the whole point of them was to join processes. Let's do a sort of reciprocity, potential efficiency on that. And I think the closest thing to reciprocity would be would the Navy be willing to do a RAISE 2.0 assessment of our software factory as part to kind of facilitate that. And I did talk to one of the reps today, and at least at the action officer level, they were very excited. And so it would just be a matter of getting the right meeting.
Hi, Victor Denard, NextGen Federal Systems. Earlier, Mr. McFarland mentioned the need for integrated services to support RMF. And by the way, I appreciate everything you guys are doing from an engineering perspective as well as from a consulting project management type of standpoint. You're doing the right thing, right? But the software pathway directive that came out really is insinuating that more CSO, OTA, FFP, COTS types of products should be done for even large-scale systems at the PO, PM level, which really doesn't involve integrated services, right? It's the COTS product's going to be provided to the PM late in stages. You don't really have integrated people doing inside of DevSecOps. It's more pushed to the COTS provider to do it on their own. And they may not have as much awareness of RMF processes or elaborate ATO types of things. Do you see that as a challenge in the near future? Thank you.
I'll take that one real quick first, just because we had a little bit of experience with something like that. So, yeah, it's a huge challenge. Coming from the DoD and us being a lot of longtime cranky DoD people, we've seen lots of times throughout history where, the pendulum swings from like going all COTS, buying into platforms industry, and then we get locked into a platform that is no longer cost effective after 5-10 years, and now we can't get off of it. And, I'm old enough to remember when this event was sponsored by a platform that now everyone is actively wanting us to get off and move off. Because we were locked in, and it's like, okay, well, that's that pendulum swing, and we're currently in the swing towards COTS and platforms area too. Which again, none of that's a bad thing. I think it's just the pendulum sort of needs to set down in the middle, which I think was kind of the gentleman's point, where we're going to use COTS platforms. Where we're just going to. They can innovate faster. They can build stuff quicker. They can get after that venture capital I talked about that we don't have access to build stuff like that. There's no reason, no way we're ever going to get away from that, but. That doesn't necessarily mean all those platforms have to have their own implicit DevSecOps capability, cross-domain capability, like inability to use any shared services. So one thing that we had done is one of our other PMOs was at DISA was actually doing a bid of platforms to replace a GOTS product. And they actually said, hey, can we use your software factory to be essentially the bake-off environment? So each of these COTS platforms actually had to install their product. They got we sponsored each one for one person per CAC ahead of time to basically go and install their product in a sub-environment off our DevSecOps platform, which has already had to use our STIG baseline images, had to connect through our boundary cloud access points, had to not have no commercial connectivity back to any other environment, things like that. And actually, we got SCARs and ISOs from all over the department to go and do evaluation of those different things. So I think that would be one. Would be, we can't just create these software factories and then be like, this is all, here until you get a contract award, and then you realize what the heck you're up against if you were a platform provider. Like these things need to have a ability to be, get stuff in the software factory in like even a sandbox mode, almost like an industry service prior to the, for industries that wanted to do business with DISA, and maybe even, if I was an industry platform, like why would I want to do my own ICAM if there's already going to be a DISA one there? Like I would like to save that money and build more important features for the department and know that. But these platforms are probably coming in being like, there's no way they have an enterprise ICAM I can actually integrate with. I have to control this, or it's going to make my platform look bad, or not have them not meet timelines or whatever else that they've committed to. So I think, opening up the software factories as almost like an evaluation software factory as well is probably the right answer for that. So that platforms that are trying to do business with DoD, or even part of their third-party assessment through PEO or the provisional assessment that they do prior, could potentially have an ability to get access to some of these software factories, so they could actually see how it performs, and take some of that feedback into their dev cycles on their platform before they then rebid it to DoD. Sir.
Just Ben Nilsson, Secretarian Systems. Just some implementation notes. We've worked with some AI agents for our pipelines for a bit now, and we found anyway, using the AI as the reviewer with a retrieval augmented generation, that has been probably the best bang for our buck. If you're going to go and do it, we're actually using it with GitLab on-prem.
Oh,
cool.
Wow,
and
that's
awesome. It's been a boon for us actually. Using it as part of your pipeline is also an okay thing to do, but really just using it as an expert within the reviewer community has been the biggest bang for our buck. And then, like I said, as the RAG, you add things into the RAG that are examples of prime things that you want, and then all of maybe your code, if you have a whole bunch of static analysis rules or whatever, the RAG will actually just adopt those right into a off-the-shelf model that you can just grab and use right out. You don't have to go and do your own training and all of that problematic stuff.
When you said augmented retrieval, can actually map back to how it got its decision from which STIG failed or which reg failed or something like that?
If you ask it, it'll get you a link back to the which one, and it'll so that goes in your RAG, all your STIGs, everything that you want will go in your RAG, plus best practices.
Sure.
So that's been a boon for us. Tuning it so it doesn't give you too much stuff. That's been because you're going to end up with those. You talked about 14,000 or whatever it was of your false positives. Sometimes you'll get like, oh, I reviewed this and it looks great, and you're like, well, I didn't want to know that. You just tell me what's wrong, and then the next step that we're kind of moving towards is then give me the proposed fixes, and then pretty soon we're going to have another LLM that reviews the fixes. So you see where that's headed, and then eventually we'll catch up with the rest of industry that a commercial that are just firing all the developers, the middle level developers, and boom, it's all done, right? But I mean, that's still a ways off. So anyway,
you've given me the business idea that I need an LLM that just takes other LLMs' false positives and tell them which ones are really false positives or not. Now we should all everyone go start that business and come back to the next FCO with some
You're
stuff.
too late. Facebook's got it already. So
yeah. I made my drunk senior developer joke earlier today, but if you line enough of them up, eventually it'll filter correctly.
They'll graduate to like 6.
The problem is you need a top and a bottom. You don't. It fills in the mid level really well, but the top and the bottom aren't there yet. So at least in our experience. So anyway,
I appreciate that
question.
experience.
That's just what I wanted to share.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Yes, sir.
Hey, good morning. Colonel Andy McGuire, Director of PEO Spectrum. So I get the honor and pleasure working with John on the regular, and also always have the challenge of him in my office complaining about policy. So with that in mind, with the ultimate goal and end state of something like a DevSecOps pipeline being modern software solutions in the hands of the warfighter at speeds of relevance, right? Curious to hear from everybody, what if you were policy king for a day? What would you change to make that happen faster, more effectively, more efficiently? And then secondly, because you mentioned, right, none of this is a technical problem. This is all a policy and culture problem. So give me a one way that you would implement to change the culture and get this going and get this adopted.
Does anybody want to be the first, Alex?
Sure. I don't have a particular line of policy, but more of like a general approach thing. A lot of times when we're talking about CATO and like one pipeline to rule them all and that sort of thing, I worry that what we're trying to do is automate the wrong thing or do the wrong thing faster. I think that one of the truisms that we've learned with DevSecOps and all this research is the small batch size argument, taking a smaller batch. Like even if you step back and you do like a code review, if you have a murder queue. So if I'm developing something and John's going to review it, if I give John 2 weeks of work and he has to review 250 lines of code, I'm going to get a terrible code review. He's going to look at it and he's going to go, I haven't had enough coffee. I'll never have enough coffee for this. And we're not going to get good feedback. If I give him an hour of work where I give him 2 or 3 functions that I've written thoroughly, he can look at that and understand and comprehend that and do a thorough evaluation, and he doesn't lose the context. I think if we can adopt that type of approach for security reviews through RMF, and can you imagine being the person whose job it is to sit down and review hundreds of pages of technical documentation all the time, and there's just a stack of it on your desk? And the shift in headspace and having to get all of that context all together at once has to be incredibly difficult. I mean, it's no wonder they're backlogged. So I would like to see it shifted so we're moving smaller chunks of work through the system. Now, what I don't know how to do is to solve the problem of the initial review, right? And that's something that I think we need to put our heads together and find a way to get that out the door. But at least we're starting to agree on what good looks like, and so I think there's hope for that.
Yeah, that first ATO is always going to be a problem. Yeah. If I were king for a day, I'd be less risk averse within what we have now, and start driving our systems to be less, or our documentation to be less, not less specific, but you don't have to be as detailed. You don't have to have an SOP explaining how you do things. You can just have a paragraph, that kind of stuff. Just to decrease the documentation side, because in my mind, my goal would be to speed up that initial authorization, with the hopes that these guys have built the DevSecOps environments so that once that first ATO is done, everything else just goes, unless something breaks or they do a significant change. That's what I would do.
And on my side, it would just be standardizing the software development lifecycle. So every PEO that I work with, PEO Spectrum, PEO Services, Transport Cyber, everyone has different requirements, and it's a pain because not only are the requirements different, it's hard to find their requirements. Like, I'm actively working with the ISMs and ISOs and SCARs on, like, what do you need? Like, tell me what you need. Like, tell me how to help you, you know? So yeah, just standardizing. If DISA as a whole could have a way, like, this is how we do Agile. You know, these are the scans we need. This is the process that we follow. That would be great.
I'll give mine one. Mine's more of like the cynical, been doing development in DoD for 21 years point of view. And same thing with the culture. Like, everyone knows the culture needs to change. No one's in a disagreement of that. I've been hearing that forever. In my experience, it all comes back to money. Culture will change when the money changes, or the money financial investment. I mean, we're seeing that now. Very active even in private industry, right? If the money's in Silicon Valley companies, they want all of our companies to act like Silicon Valley companies. So that's what's changing the culture. If they didn't do that, then it wouldn't have happened. So I think on our side in DoD, I'll give one great example of our most successful C2 DevSecOps program that's literally deploying from Booz Allen Dev all the way up to IL6, Stratcom, Combat Command 4 deployed, environments, 100% through pipelines. There's no system administrator, no human has any handoff in that. It got that way not because we decided to do it that way, or we had total buy-in. When Stratcom gave us the GEON, the Joint Emergent Operational Need, which is almost like the little requirements one-pager to do, is they said, you will deploy this through DevSecOps. You will build this in a DevSecOps first manner. And here's how. It's not just what to build, it's how I want to receive it, how I want it built came to. And that money we got, that was, the requirement. There was no, okay, well, I'll not do the DevSecOps part. I'll just, develop it this way. And, don't tell me the how, just tell me the what. It was like, this is what I want and this is how I want it. And the money was tied to that. We just weren't going to do it. That was a requirement. They weren't going to accept it in a different way. And so I think the more from the policy perspective, the folks in leadership can understand, like, hey, you've got to bake some of these culture changes into the stipulation of getting the money. Like, I'm not going to give you money for, XYZ thing that you've been doing a while unless I see it as part of your criteria for the grading of the success of that product that you're deploying it through DevSecOps, through modernization, and through containerization, all those things. Because when it's an option and you can still deploy your product and spend your budget and get the next year's budget and not have to do any of this stuff, not have to address tech debt, then you get away with it and you don't have to do it. But you tack the money, then the culture will change.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, I'm getting the signal at time, so I think that's all we have today. Appreciate everyone coming out.